Okay, so today we're going to be diving into a really heavy topic,
Yeah.
but one that's absolutely crucial to talk about. We're talking about gang rape in India. And, it's not just about the act itself, but the fear it creates, how it's a part of the fabric of society. I read this story, and it really stuck with me, about a 4-year-old girl in a movie theater in Mumbai asking about gang rape.
Oh my God.
That's how, that's
Man.
how like, ever-present this horror is.
It's chilling. It reveals how this fear becomes a lived reality for women in India from such a young age. It's not theoretical. It's understanding what some men are capable of, a threat that's just there all the time.
Yeah, and this story about the little girl, you know, tragically, it's not unique, right? It speaks to this larger issue that's ingrained in Indian society, this term rape culture. Have you heard that term before? What does it mean to you?
Yeah, definitely. To me, rape culture refers to these societal attitudes, norms, and practices that normalize or excuse sexual violence against women. And, unfortunately, we see this play out in India in so many ways.
So it's not just the act itself, but the environment that sort of allows it to flourish.
Exactly. It's the jokes, the victim blaming, the lack of consequences, the silence around it. All these things build a culture where sexual violence is just like tolerated, even accepted.
It's almost like the fear itself is used to silence women, to perpetuate the cycle.
Yeah, 100%.
Okay.
It's about control, right? Control over women, control, limiting their freedom, keeping the power structures the way they are.
Exactly. And the statistics on this are just horrifying, right? In 2021 alone, over 31,000 rapes were reported. That's one every 16 minutes. And
Great.
those are just the reported cases.
Exactly. And that's what's really disturbing, right? Because a huge percentage, a staggering 77% of women who experience this kind of violence in India, they never report it.
Why is that? Why wouldn't they come forward?
It's complicated, right? There's so much stigma in India around being a victim of sexual assault. Women face huge social repercussions. They could be ostracized by their families, their communities. Think about it. They're often blamed for what happened.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
People question how they were dressed, their behavior, why they were in a certain place.
So they're punished for being the victim of a crime.
Yeah, in a way. And then there's the fear of what happens if they do speak up. A lot of women don't trust that the authorities will protect them. They're afraid of more violence, either from the person who attacked them or their friends or family.
Right, so it's societal pressure, fear, and this lack of faith in the system all coming together.
Exactly. And it protects the people who are committing these crimes, and the cycle just keeps going.
This is not a new phenomenon either. I mean,
Right.
this is something that's been going on for decades, for centuries probably.
Yeah.
And, a good illustration of that is the story of Fulan Devi.
Yeah, I've heard that name.
Her story is from 1980, and she's a really tragic example of how gang rape, especially targeting lower castes, has been used as this weapon for decades.
Right. Her case really brought international attention to this, these horrors of caste-based sexual violence in India.
Can you tell the listener a little bit about the caste system, for anyone who might not be familiar, and how it relates to all of this?
Sure. So the caste system, it's basically this hierarchical social division that's existed in India for centuries. You're born into your caste, and that dictates your social standing, your job, even who you're allowed to marry. And naturally, those in the lower castes, like Fulan Devi, are the most vulnerable to this kind of exploitation and violence.
So gang rape becomes a way to, exert dominance over these communities that are already marginalized.
Exactly. It's a brutal way to reinforce those power structures and keep the lower castes subjugated.
Devi's story is a complicated one. She was kidnapped, repeatedly gang raped by men from a higher caste, and then she actually ends up taking revenge on her attackers.
Wow.
Now, obviously, we don't condone violence at all, but her actions, I think, really speak to the level of desperation and the lack of justice that she felt she had.
Absolutely. Her case really exposes the flaws in a system that fails to protect its most vulnerable people. It felt like she had nowhere to turn, no one to help her, and that ultimately led her to take the law into her own hands.
Yeah, it's tragic. It's like these individual acts of resistance, while powerful, they don't address these huge systemic issues.
Exactly. That's the thing. It has to be institutional change, a justice system that's fair, a society that values all its citizens equally, regardless of caste or gender.
For sure. And, if Fulan Devi's story was this wake-up call, I think the case of Bilkis Bano, another victim of gang rape, really reveals how deep-seated this hatred is, how it's often targeted towards specific communities, especially Muslim women.
Yeah, that's a really powerful example. Yeah, her story is It's just heartbreaking. And it reminds us that, these religious tensions, especially against Muslim women, can be so dangerous.
And her story takes us back to the 2002 Gujarat riots, which was just this period of intense communal violence. Bilkis Bano, she was 19 at the time and pregnant,
Oh,
and she was brutally gang raped by a Hindu mob. They also murdered 14 members of her family,
God.
including her 3-year-old daughter.
It's just, it's awful. It shows how sexual violence is used as a weapon, especially during these times of conflict, a way to humiliate, to terrorize, just to completely dominate the other as they see it.
And in this case, the other being the Muslim community.
Exactly. And, what's really disturbing is there were accusations about the involvement of people in power. The source we read, it mentioned allegations that Prime Minister Modi, he was a top official in Gujarat at the time, and there are these accusations that he kind of looked the other way during the riots.
Right. Why?
Now, it's important to remember these are accusations, and, we're not here to pick sides or anything like that.
Of course, yeah.
But it makes you think about how politics, religion, and violence, they all intersect in India.
Yeah, it's this feeling that justice is just absent, that people in power can do whatever they want.
Mm-hmm.
And it just compounds the trauma of the whole situation.
Absolutely. And that sense of injustice, it got even worse in 2022 when 11 men, the ones who were convicted of raping Bilkis Bano and murdering her family, they were released from prison.
No way.
Yeah, the Gujarat government, they made that decision and it sparked huge outrage, protests all over the country.
Oh, I'm sure, yeah. How can that happen? These men, they did these horrible things, and they're welcomed back like heroes.
It's a really disturbing reflection of how deep these ideologies run in some parts of Indian society. Makes you wonder, was this a political strategy, releasing these convicts to, I don't know, appease certain voters?
Oh, that's a terrifying thought, that politics could be put above justice for these women who have been through so much.
Right. It just shows the challenges India faces when it comes to sexual violence against women. And, as big as these cases are, Bilkis Bano's case, the 2012 Delhi bus rape, these other cases in 2018, 2020.
Right. Yeah, those are the ones that make the news.
Exactly. But they're just the tip of the iceberg. There are countless women living in fear every single day in India. It impacts every part of their lives.
So let's talk about that lived experience of this fear. What does that mean for these women in their everyday life?
Imagine the constant vigilance, the risks they calculate in their heads, the restrictions they face every single day. Imagine if walking down the street, taking the bus, or even just going out after dark filled you with anxiety.
Right, yeah. I mean, the source we read, it talked about women carrying pepper spray, GPS trackers, even learning to shout fire instead of help if they're attacked because they think it'll get a faster response.
Wow. It shows you how little faith there is in getting immediate help. And it takes such a toll, this fear. It limits their freedom, their choices, everything.
Absolutely. It's like they have to constantly be on guard, policing their own behavior, living in this box created by fear.
Exactly. And it's not just about physical safety, right? It's the psychological impact. The stress, the constant feeling that something bad could happen, it wears on you.
Of course.
Yeah.
It's trauma, both individual and collective. It affects their mental health, their emotional well-being. It's deep.
It really is. And it brings up this question that we've been dancing around this whole time. Why gang rape? What is it about this specific type of violence that's so prevalent?
Yeah, why gang rape? It's a question I think about a lot with this topic.
It's a tough one. There isn't an easy answer, is there? But, experts say it's often much more than just, sexual desire. It's about power, dominance.
It's about proving their masculinity in this awful, toxic way.
Right, exactly. It's men bonding over, having power over women. And a lot of the time, this behavior, it's fueled by these deep-seated societal norms, this culture that often just looks the other way, or even worse, condones it.
And we can't ignore the role of patriarchy in all this.
Oh yeah, patriarchy is huge in this. It creates this whole system where men have all the power and women are treated as inferior, as property even.
It's about the system itself,
Yeah.
not just a few bad apples.
Yeah, exactly. You've got the bystanders who don't say anything, the communities that protect these guys, the legal system that fails to bring justice. It all adds up. It creates this environment where gang rape is, unfortunately. It's not surprising.
It's so disheartening to think about how deeply rooted this is. I mean,
Right.
even just as people outside of India listening to this, it can feel really overwhelming. Like, what can we even do?
I get that. It's a big problem. It won't change overnight, that's for sure. But even just by listening to this, by engaging with these stories,
Right.
you're challenging that silence, right? that silence that lets this violence continue.
So just having these conversations, even if they're hard, even if they make us uncomfortable.
Exactly. Don't shy away from it. Talk about it. Share these stories. Amplify the voices of the people who have been through it, the activists who are fighting for change, and support organizations that are actually doing the work on the ground, fighting against sexual violence, helping survivors.
What about the legal system in India? Have there been any changes, any positive movement on that front?
There have been some reforms, yeah. Especially after, high-profile cases like Nirbaya's, Bilkis Bano's, there was a lot of outrage, rightfully so.
Right.
India brought in tougher laws, faster trials for rape cases. They even, finally, recognized marital rape as a crime.
Okay, so some progress. But, I mean, laws can only do so much, right? They can't change how people think overnight.
Exactly. It has to be deeper than that. It's about changing the whole mindset, challenging these ideas of gender inequality, toxic masculinity, and just this baseline acceptance of violence that we see.
We need to raise future generations with respect, equality, consent, all of that.
100%. Empowering women so they can protect themselves, yes, but also so they can just live their lives, without fear.
There was this line in the source material about it being a fight between forgetting and remembering. It really struck me because it feels like a call to action.
For sure.
We can't let these stories just disappear.
We can't. It's a fight for a future where women in India are safe, respected, where their lives matter, where they're heard.
It's a future worth fighting for, and it starts with all of us choosing to remember, choosing to resist, and demanding better. That's all the time we have for today's deep dive, but I hope this conversation will stick with you. Think about the questions we've raised today. What will you do to be part of this fight? How will you choose to remember?